when you don't mean to. At times, while we're traversing the map, we can all suffer from bad positioning. It's not always going to be your fault, but what you want to try to learn from that is that when you're in an area that you're familiar with and you know is not favorable to you or even your teammates, especially if your enemy was to attack you, then you want to be able to find the quickest spot to reposition yourself not so vulnerable. Now, common features like high ground, large amount of cover, a building with minimal entry and exit points are all generally great areas for good positioning. But the best tip I can give you is always try to move in between different pieces of cover, even if you aren't actively engaging with an enemy. We know this is a game of seconds, so in the event you do get ambushed, or in the event you're pushing a known enemy but they don't necessarily know where you are pushing from or your whole team is pushing from, you always want to be near some form of cover because it's definitely going to help you out. In theory, you'll be taking less damage and you'll have better positioning over your opponent. Now, cover isn't a novel idea in any FPS shooter, but players don't always tend to gravitate towards it unless they're really experienced in looking for it. So although this may seem fairly basic, you'd be surprised how many times our minds will just have us drift off because maybe we're not being mindful about our surroundings and we find ourselves in a worse spot and our opponents in a better spot. And this makes us much more susceptible to dying to them. Number 3, you're not shield swapping, or certainly not enough. This is one of the fundamental skills in Apex, and as you continue to progress through the game, it becomes more vital to do, but it's also a true skill gap. I'm sure most of you know about this mechanic by now, but you're just underutilizing it when it comes down to it in game. Whether it's that white armor on the ground that you can quickly swap to in the heat of a fight, or it's remembering that you wiped a squad 10 meters from you and there's still a blue armor swap in one of the boxes that you can get to quickly. It's all important to remember and execute. Armor swapping can be practiced in the firing range now, whereas before we just had to get better at it in the game, which is where I recommend you to practice it the most. And if you're on mouse and keyboard, make sure you're utilizing moving around, jumping, and or crouching while you're in the death box grabbing that swap. For all my controller players, I recommend getting used to grabbing armor swaps quickly first and then incorporating a jump while you're going into the box so that you're not just a sitting duck in the box when you're going for that swap. Controller players can't really move around in a death box, certainly not like mouse and keyboard players can. And yes, I do know about a couple little tactics that allow for some slight movement, but I found the jump, interact into the box is the most consistent way to get the swap and utilize some form of movement. Now lastly, you must begin to be aware of what boxes your teammates have already swapped as well. Countless times I'll see players neglect to pay attention to what box their teammate just swapped as they're running to that box while cracked, only to be shocked that that armor swap is gone. That usually results in their dying as well. In most cases, you'll be able to tell which boxes your teammates already swapped if you just pay attention to their armor levels and what death boxes are where. Number 4, healing. Now, healing is the cornerstone of thriving in this game. If you overheal in certain moments where just team firing that enemy would result in them dying sooner and your teammates staying alive, then you could be making a grave mistake. On the contrary, and what is far more common for players is not healing soon enough and in safe spots. Now, I don't care how basic this sounds. It's something that I see at all levels in coaching Apex. And for you more experienced players, I guarantee you it's probably about balancing when to heal when you're in a clutch up moment, like trying to complete a 1v3 or a 1v2. I see good players in these scenarios miscalculate constantly when they should heal or not healing at all. But first off, you gotta make sure you have enough shields and health whenever possible. Ideal amounts are 2 to 4 shield batteries, more is always better, 8 to 12 shield cells, 4 syringes, and 2 med kits. Now these are just ideals, it's not set in stone. If you can shoot for that, you should be chilling. Remember, your backpack size, what you can find, if you'll be taking more zone damage, are all important variables when calculating what the amount of shield and health you need to carry is. But let's talk in some simple terms. If you take more damage than you deal and you have the time and space to heal, use it. If you downed one player and took 100 damage and your armor is now cracked, but you know you're going to have to fight one more player who is presumed to be full health and shields, you're going to have little chance of winning that if you aren't able to heal or reset with an armor swap. This is as simple as I can make it, guys. Health and shield is all just a numbers game, but it's crucial you pay attention to this at every single moment during the game. Because trust me, the good player you watch does this and does it well. Number 5, incorrect ability usage, or just flat out using the wrong legend for your playstyle. Using abilities incorrectly, whether that's at the wrong time, wrong place, or forgetting to use them altogether because you maining a different legend and forgot what your current legend does. I mean, all of these things can and will affect how your fights play out. The longer that Apex has been around, the more abilities have continued to play a significant role in fights. Now, once you understand the concepts of what your legend can do, it's going to be time to take in where and how they really thrive. At the end of the day, this is probably what draws so many people to keep coming over to Apex and getting into the game. Another angle to look at this from, though, that is super important is understanding what your enemy is capable of with their legend's abilities. This helps you make split-second predictions or reads on what you believe their next move will be. If you're forgetting to use your abilities, it may be time to hone in on 1 or 2 legends to focus on. I know a lot of you probably have a main legend, but if you're one of the players who doesn't, or you feel like your main isn't cutting it, it's best you get to mastering just 1 or 2 of the legends. This way you can learn the different ways to outplay and outmaneuver your opponents, and constantly switching your legend could be screwing up your ability to have a deep understanding of what's at play in this game. Number 6, and this one is super important, overextending and getting focus fired. You guys love to talk about this one all the time in my comments section, and it's the main thing you're going to want to watch out for if you're going to take anything away from this video. Simply put, the more gunfire on you speeds up how quickly you'll die in this game. If you're not mindful of overextending, you will be getting clipped up fast. I'm sure you've had a lot of sweaty matches this season and died to a very coordinated team. This will feel very frustrating because it's going to feel like you didn't even have a chance, or at least a fair one at that. But listen, the same thing is true on the flip side. Team firing with your squad mates is going to make your life easier and help you get more kills. But back to overextending. One thing that helped me correct this bad habit was being extremely mindful of where my teammates were at all times, especially in accordance to where I believe or know my enemies to be. This way I can rarely overextend and be surprised by it. Now, I'll admit, if you're solo queuing, this isn't always going to be easy. Predicting what your random may or may not do is a tricky thing to manage. However, if you're able to apply all of these things that I've gone over into your gameplay, and you're being mindful about your positioning, well, I guarantee you'll find yourself overextending less and less. No one really tries to overextend for a kill unless they're being extremely greedy and like ego challenging a fight. This really starts from just not paying attention a ton or not making the right read on the situation. But if you truly practice being mindful of all of these things, well, the game will be yours for the taking. Trust me. Number 7 is players giving up. A lot of players tend to give up when their teammates go down. It's like they almost know their fate is determined already or something. And that could look like just running in blindly into a building where you don't really know what's going on and you're trying to be helpful, or it could just mean forgetting all of the principles in the game that you've worked hard on, like positioning, timing of your abilities, inventory management, and much more. Personally, for me, I think the best feeling in this game is clutching up a fight, especially when you have to like 1v3 or something like that. And you're not going to experience that, or at least often, tend to give up. Now, I know some situations the fight will just be flat out unwinnable, and I get that, but that's certainly not going to be every time. And remember, you're playing against other people who want similar things as you do, so you can't just rest on your laurels. You gotta try to take it from them. And number 8 is very similar to number 7, but it differs just slightly. And I'm calling it hero ball. What is this? Well, it's when you're trying to be too good of a teammate, but at the expense of really taking care of the moment. As a result, you're gonna throw your game. While this is similar to number 7, I swear people always gravitate to this at one time or another, at least until they truly learn how to process the different steps in Apex. You have to be disciplined and mentally acute when it comes to clutching fights. I mean, you don't even need the best gun skill or movement. You need to outwit your enemy. There's several different examples I could list, but just imagine both your teammates go down and they're inside a building or something where you can't see all of the enemies. You are blindly running in there because you want to be next to your teammates because you feel like you kind of missed out on some action, and you get clipped by all of these players' teamwork. This is the epitome of playing hero ball. You want to be helpful. It's not like you're actually giving up. It's that you're not actually thinking about the situation at play. Another example is you could be in the process of trying to clutch a fight, and let's say it's down to the last guy. And instead of just abusing the high ground that you have over them, you rush off of high ground and you try to speed up the fight. And in doing so, you kind of give away your leverage in the fight. This is another example of playing hero ball. What it boils down to is just not thinking enough about the situation. You're rushing because you want to outwin, and you want to try to be that good teammate. For newer players, this could look like going to revive your down teammate even when you know it's a bad time to do so. Like, newer players love to go for a revive when they know they're just like, I wasn't at the fight, I've got to try to be helpful here. while I'm reviving, I'm getting shot in the back. There's so many different examples that could fall under this category. But what it all boils down to is just trying to take in the information, build up your skills, and not throw them all away in the heat of the moment. Because in the heat of the moment is where you're going to need to apply all of these skills. Otherwise, the player on the other end of the fight is going to use that against you and take you out. In this video, I'm going to be talking about landing, looting, and inventory management. Now, there are a lot of new players in Apex right now, and there are a ton that are also returning, and there are just players who've been playing for some time and still don't really understand how this stuff works. So let's get right into it. Now, let's start off with how to land properly. Now, there are really two different examples here that I'm going to cover, when you're contested and when you're uncontested. But there are going to be some nuances with each one. So let's start off with being uncontested. Let's say you and your squad, whether you're playing with friends or you're playing with randoms, are being uncontested and you're landing in a POI. The goal here should be so that you guys all split up among your each respective area within the POI. Now, if it's a really large POI like Skyhook or something, then you definitely want to use your discretion here to look around to see if a team went countdown or potentially survey camp or any of the nearby POIs that might venture into Skyhook, especially if the zone ends up pulling to that area. You don't want to be landing too far away from one another, but you want to give yourself enough area so that you're not looting on top of one another. Far too often, players will just land in the same exact area, and that screws one another up. Most of you know this because there's only so many loot paths, right? And if two of you are looting the same path, that just means there's less to go around. It's a really simple concept. However, one of the worst parts about Apex is that people who are the jump master can't force the players to break off in them. It works the other way around. So if you aren't the jump master, you're able to break off as soon as you want and land in the area that you want to go into. What usually screws up players, particularly while solo queuing, is they'll be the jump master, they'll ping a spot that they want to land to, they are uncontested, and then one or two of their randoms land right on top of them, and that's just screws them over. And in these situations, look, there's really nothing you can do except start to run in a different direction and hopefully loot your own respective area. If players are paying attention though, splitting up helps you because the sooner you guys all get looted up, the sooner you can either move on to rotate if you need to, or look for a fight if that's what you want to do. The point here is that you want to make this as efficient as possible, and that starts with looting your respective areas and then meeting up after 60 to 90 seconds or so, depending on when you need to leave and what you're planning to do next. If it's a smaller POI, then this may be a little bit more difficult. Say it's a POI like Geyser. Well, someone should land in the back, and then the other two should split the U-shaped buildings. Now, when it comes to being contested, I want to preface with, well, it really depends on where the enemy team is landing, and let's just assume for simplicity's sake, it's a 50-50. You know, your team and the enemy team. Now, with each POI, there will be differences here that you want to evaluate, and there's not a one-size-fits-all approach because the enemy team could land in one spot in one match, and you could have a good counter to that, but then in the next match, they land in a totally different way, and that screws up how you wanted to land or that you were used to landing. Oh, and one really important factor that every player on the team must learn to do is free look around while they drop. Now, I've been preaching this for years now, but it's something that will give you the information about where you should land and where your enemies are landing as well. If you're not free looking, you're really just putting blinders on, and that's just going to negatively affect your gameplay because it's going to affect the lack of information you have about your surroundings. You need to learn to free look while still dropping. Too many players give me the excuse of like, well, I'm jump master, so I can't look around. Wrong. You need to build this skill up. You can focus on your drop and focus on free looking at the same time. You're going to have to balance it more so than the person who may not be jump master, but it's still a skill you want to develop and enhance, especially if you solo queue, because you can't just count on your randoms to free look and communicate to you what they're seeing and whatnot. So free looking is of the utmost importance. Now back to the contest. Now, speaking broadly here, there are three things that I always look out for when it comes to a contest. Now, first is I always want to see if I can land in some sort of high ground. Obviously, high ground will give you a positional advantage in a fight, but it also lets you see a lot more regarding your surroundings. For example, at top of a building will give you a better vantage point to see out regarding your next move. Second is if I'm landing in an area where I could get pinched, could be trapped, and when I say trapped, I imagine either getting surrounded by multiple enemies or multiple teams, or even just trapped from the map. Now, this would be mostly applicable in an edge POI like Climatizer, Dome, anything where the map is just going to run out of space. If things go bad and you don't have a good area to fall back to, that could wind up harming you. And third is I always want to land right on something that I can quickly access a chance at a weapon or two. I don't want to land then have to run 30 feet to the nearest loot spawn and have my enemy already get shots at me before I've even got to a place where a weapon could spawn. Now, you obviously can't control weapon spawns, but you can go to the places where loot does spawn, and that will give you the highest chance of success. Of course, we've all landed on a bin and got 2 sniper stocks and a frag grenade, while our enemy opened another bin and got a massive and an R301. But what I'm really talking about is you don't want to land in the spot, waste time running to the nearest loot spawn because either you weren't paying attention or, yeah, it really will just come down to paying attention. Because some players who are new aren't going to necessarily know where all the loot spawns are, and that will just take time to build up. But through experience, you will gather that and you will know, okay, there are pills here, okay, loot spawns here on the ground, things of that nature. But assuming you already have that awareness, really try to think about these 3 things. Now, in most situations where you get contested in a certain POI, you want to think about what area can you and your teammates occupy, and basically you kind of want to be a little greedy here. If you got to split this one POI among 6 players, your team versus their team, and you don't want to give them more space than your team occupies. This isn't always something you can control, but it's something you want to look out for. If you see a team that is sticking together right up until the landing, then that jump master is going to land those other 2 players wherever they go. And that could be super beneficial to you and your squad if you pick up on it and if you choose to land in your own desired location, which is what I'm recommending to do. You'll see in this clip here where we land at the wall POI on Storm Point, I told my teammates, watch where they go and try to take as much space as you can. So basically we got one side of the wall, which is 2 buildings and 2 different sections of pills, and they got the same thing relatively speaking, but they all landed on one building with the pills outside of it. So that helped us because they didn't really split up their landing at all, and so we knew to move on them rather quickly and roll the dice, assuming that not only did we have better loot, but we had more space and we had a great idea of where they all were at and where they'd be heading to next, because I would assume 1 or 2 players wouldn't find enough loot, which would mean they would try to run to that back right building, and that got them split up. This made it really simple for us to attack them and gave us some extra confidence. And this is something that the best players use against their opponents. So I'm telling you to use it against yours. Now, when it comes to landing with more than one other team, this could be considered a hot drop where you land with 3 or more teams in one POI. And there's a couple different ways to play this. Of course, if it's in ranked, I'll just straight up say this is rarely a good idea to do, as each team is generally going to be thinking, yeah, let's let the other 2 teams fight first and then we'll third party. This can create a stalemate among all of the teams, and where no one ends up really fighting and then no one has a lot of loot, or maybe your team just doesn't have a lot of loot, and this will screw you up the rest of your game because you may not find a lot of other opportunities to gather loot except from just fighting. Now, if it's a pub and you just want to get into some action and get your hands dirty, well, really think about 2 things. Can you land on the edge of the POI and work your way in so that you're not forced to fight if you don't find good loot? This is the more passive approach, but it's also more strategic. But there is also the approach of just landing in the middle of that thing and getting right into it and seeing if you can fight your way out. This can be fun to pull off with friends, but most of the time with randoms, it will go poorly, at least in my experience. Sure, maybe 1 out of 10 games you'll frag out and you'll make it out of that POI and you'll carry your randoms through that hot drop. But for the most part, you'll be stuck having to try to 1v9 with just like 1 weapon and 2 shield cells. So it can get pretty rough. But if you're gonna hot drop, really think about where everybody's going and think about how big the POI is in the event that you can't get your weapon, where you're landing, where will you move to next, so on and so forth. Okay, now let's get into inventory management. Now, inventory management will scale up as you progress throughout the match, because ultimately, the longer you stay alive, theoretically, the more loot you'll find and the more your loot will upgrade. Now, let's say we're starting into a match. 2 cells, 2 syringes, no weapon, no backpack, white armor, white helmet. Okay, I'm gonna start off, I find a triple take, and then I find an R99. So with the R99, I'll probably find 40 ammo, and with the triple take, I'll probably find 20. So you can see here, I've got 10 slots. And basically what I want to think about is what's my primary and what's my secondary. So in most examples, the triple take will probably be the primary, unless a lot of the fights I wind up in are close range. But I don't necessarily always get to control that, so that's why I'm starting triple take in weapon 1. Now, it doesn't really matter where the weapon is, whether it's 1 or 2. I mean, it kind of does, but you can always swap it if you want. So for a weapon like the triple take, an ideal amount, because it's a single fire gun, I probably want something like 120. That would take up 2 squares. So you can see 60 in each. 120 is a good amount, especially as I don't have a ton of backpack space. But let's say I do grab a white backpack over here and I get 2 extra slots with that. I still will probably continue to carry 120. 180 will be the highest I'll go with the triple take, because keep in mind, it's a single fire gun. That's 180 shots. That's a ton of shots. I don't need that much. And I probably will get a kill before I would ever extend even half of that amount of ammo, so I could just find more ammo if needed, or if everybody I killed and came across didn't have energy ammo, I could swap weapons. But that's like such a far-fetched thing to run out of this amount. Now, changing guns for a second, if I had a Nemesis, I would burn 120 ammo much faster. So my ideal loadout would probably be more like 180 at the minimum, but 240 is probably something I'd be really comfortable with. Because very quickly, I can extend a whole magazine and burn 20 bullets. And that's without a magazine on my gun. Now, going back to the triple take example and holding 120 ammo, I obviously want to look for the necessary attachments that I'm going to come across. So something like an optic. Okay, I found a 3X, white stock, and I've yet to find a magazine. For this R9, the R9 right now is very weak. Regardless, I'm looking for a magazine, a stock, and a laser sight, maybe a sight. Alright, I need a lot of light ammo because this is going to burn ammo fast. So how much should I be looking for? 180, 240 maybe? 240 is a lot for my secondary, but this leaves me with 4 extra slots. Now keep in mind with small heals, they're all stacked in even numbers. So I can hold 4, and that's the same as holding 2. Same as syringes, 4. Now my rough rule of thumb for shields to health is I want a 2-to-1 ratio. So I want like 8 cells, 4 syringes. Now if I don't have any big heals, like med kits or batteries, or I guess even a Phoenix kit, but I'll get the Phoenix kit in a second here. If I don't have any big heals, I want to use the slot in which the big heal would take up for the small heals, at least temporarily. So for instead of holding 8 cells, I'll be looking for 12. Now, if I can get a battery, great. Now medkit, great. I don't necessarily need to drop these 4 cells unless I want a grenade or an ultimate accelerant, something of that nature. Something that would take the utility here. But I could also, because I'm running this R9 and 240 bullets is a lot, I could drop the 60 light and carry a grenade. This could also take the place of a Phoenix kit if you want, but if it was up to me, I might drop the 4 cells in exchange for the Phoenix kit. This is a variable, okay? It will alter throughout the game, it will change, it'll be something that you'll use your discretion, but right now this inventory looks pretty good. One thing I also want to keep in mind is that as I go through the game, having only 1 battery is a vulnerable spot to be in. So I want to keep my eyes peeled for another shield battery as well as a med kit. If I'm already carrying 1, I can carry 2, it takes the same amount of space. But for the shield battery, it's the same concept, it's just like this is really, really important to have more than 1. So if you don't have any, that time to heal gets extended by a lot. That can take you out the fight, that can make you lose the fight. So it's something you want to keep your eyes peeled for. As soon as I get a squad wipe and I'm in the death box and I only have 1 battery, I'm scouring those boxes for the batteries. I want to make sure that I get one before my random teammates gobble them all up. Now let's say I've got the blue bag now. So I've got more space. 2 bats, 12 cells. I have 1 grenade. So here I can flex if I want to carry more grenades, which I probably will with this loadout. I'm going to look for at least 1 more. And then on this extra slot, I can decide, do I want ammo? Do I find more bats? Because ideally, 4 bats is a really comfortable spot to be in. 4 is like the perfect amount for me. Yeah, I mean, obviously I'd take more if I could, but having 4 is really, really comfortable. Now, if I find more bats at this stage, this is something I've talked about before, and some people have argued with me. If I find more bats here, then I'm going to drop the cells. I don't need as many cells if I've got the shield batteries to make up for it. However, if I lose those bats, this is still a really comfortable position to be in for heals. Now, let's switch guns for a second. Pretend I'm back on the Nemesis. Alright, now I've got to upgrade the ammo. I'm probably going to drop a little light in exchange. Because the light is a secondary 120, that's fine. I'm looking for 240 on the Nemesis, maybe even 300, depending on if it's a ranked game, and I may not know the next time I'll be able to get loot if it's getting towards that later stage. So the universal concepts you can apply regardless of your loadout is that you really want to strive for 4 bats, 2 medkits, 8 to 12 cells, I'll say, and 4 syringes. You never need to carry more syringes unless, of course, you've got a long rotation in the zone and you're like, damn, I really need help. In that case, I'd probably drop a nade and I'd stack up on extra syringes so that when I come out of zone, hopefully I'm still sitting around 4 and 2 for the health. I'll burn these 4 extra syringes while I'm in zone. Now, of course, if I couldn't find any medkits, right, then I might carry 8 syringes. Maybe. Depends on the zone. Depends on how much zone damage I think I'll take. But chances are, if I'm carrying more than 4 syringes, I'm doing something wrong. Besides that one example I just gave. You're never going to need to deal 8 syringes without dying from the rest of the game. Like, you're dead before you're going to heal that way. Remember, your shield gets hit first. So that's why you want more shields than your health. But if you are stuck in zone and you're rotating, you need to pay attention to health. And this is just a metric that you always want to look for. It's a baseline thing. Every time you're looting a death box, every time you're looting around, you want to make sure that you're sitting around these numbers. You don't want to get caught in zone and be like, man, I totally forgot and neglected to pick up health. Now I'm just going to die. You don't want to be one of those players. Now let's talk about a different loadout real quick. Let's say I'm running Peacekeeper as my secondary. So I'm looking for 16 shells. 32 would be the absolute maximum for a shotgun. I rarely carry 32 though. 16 is just fine. That's enough for one fight and then some. And let's say I am running probably going 300 on the energy because I've then subtracted some of the inventory space from the secondary weapon, like the R9, right? Because the R9 I was carrying anywhere from 120 to 180, which would take up 3 slots, 2 to 3 slots. Now being on the Peacekeeper, I don't need to do that, so I can make up for it in other areas, which I'm going to choose to do that with the energy ammo, and I'm going to choose to do that with shields and grenades, and maybe an ultimate accelerant if I can find one. So now I've got 3 nades, I'm going to go for 2 more bats, and I've still got an extra slot. This is on purpose, right? This is like the most comfortable you'll be when you have the best backpack. Obviously gold is a little bit better, but it doesn't give you more space, it just allows you to carry more big heals. Now I've got all of this, and this is really, really comfortable. Having decent game sense is vital to improving at Apex, but so is understanding all of the different legend ability usage, whether that be the legend you're playing, the legends your teammates are using, or even what legends you're going up against. So in this video, I'll break down several different fights and go in depth on how I was able to outplay my opponents, not only using abilities, but also my game sense. So let's get into it. Now in this first clip on Caustic, we are pushing Stormcatcher, trying to third party on duo kill with my current speeds. You'll see I get scanned here, so I toss my Caustic ult. It's not the best ult, but it is good at denying some area. Once we get the Bloodhound cracked over here, Speeds is able to take care of it. And then there's the Watson. Once again, we team fired both of these players, resulting in them dying very quickly. Now, we can see that their third teammate's behind the door. It's a Wraith. She's trying to set a portal. I go for the Thirst on the Watson so she can't take it, and so I can get an armor swap, and I start getting shot at from the roof. This is the other team that we didn't know about. So you see how I double backed here going into the portal? Super risky move because I'd stay in line of sight of the guy on height, but also I'd still be in line of sight if I tried to jump off Stormcatcher. So I was faced with 2 decisions that I felt like were both pretty bad, but I elected to go for the portal because my friend had already taken it, saying it's clear. And also being on Caustic, I feel like I can trap the portal if they want to chase me. This is a huge advantage as Caustic, so I try to utilize it. Once I take it and go low ground here, Speeds goes high ground and he runs into this full team. He gets knocked. I pop this Phoenix kit and I kind of wait to see what are these guys going to do. You can see that I put a trap on the portal, and this is going to let me know how many enemies take it and when they do. And you'll see right here, I've got 2 of them. I get this Valkyrie pretty low. She's slowed, she's stunned. I'm trying to capitalize off of that. While that's going on, Newcastle tried to push me. I get some good sprays here on him, and then there's only 1 left. Now at this time, our teammate is pushing up. He's just arriving to the fight, so I'm hoping he can do something, you know, take some attention here, but I can hear that Fuse is going for the res. So I'm trapped in this mother load. I throw a couple of traps out so that I can just, I don't know, create something here if I need to. Off the scan, I see that they res, but Newcastle elected to run pretty far. I catch him, and then I'm rolling off momentum here. Fuse must have taken damage from either my teammate or his own ult, I'm not sure, but it results in a nice 1v3. Now one thing I want to highlight here is as soon as these players came through the portal, I knew 2 of them did, so I never got a tick on the third, so I don't know if he took a different route. As soon as I downed the Valkyrie though, I immediately looked to a different area because I know the second player had already taken my gas damage. He's not that close. I got a faint audio cue that the third player was approaching, and that's very common here. While all of the attention's on me, I down one of theirs, and here's the Newcastle looking for me. Luckily I get a huge spray on him, and I know I have to push him. Now this push was pretty risky. You know, I jump over the car. I'd be theoretically in line of sight of the Fuse, but I felt like it was worth it because I figured I could quickly get back to my cover, and at this point it's much easier to deal with this fight if I take out one of the support legends that has a special skill. Now in this next clip, we're moving on to this fight that just finished up on the edge of the zone. Got my Caustic ult in hand, ready to go with it. Just in case I see someone, I throw it at the Bangalore. Now look, Bangalore goes in here. I know that the zone's cutting off that building, so I trap her. Once I trap it, I basically force her to be stuck in there for at least a few extra seconds. Speeds is 1v1ing this player on the roof, while I was Newcastle. Now Newcastle kind of jumps me, surprised me, got the first shot, but I'm able to take care of him. I throw a trap down. I was gonna bat, but then I just go for the armor swap, and you can see right there briefly, Bangalore ran out, rushed it, and Speeds took care of her. I felt like this was a good use case of having the ult out, denying the area, forcing her into a building, trapping the door, which stalls her and just takes her out of the fight, and then using our gunplay and our teamwork to just 1v1 each of those players. I really looked at the zone and assessed what spots we're in and what swaps worked in, and I used that really to my advantage here when it came to denying area, which Caustic is excellent at. Now in this last fight, we have a 3v3, but we're getting held out of zone by this team, and they had already shot down our evac, so we have to push forward. You see the lifeline was up on that rock wall. I got a decent spray on her and I cracked her, so I used that. Drop down. You see how I cut into the right, making this angle that she had not work anymore. She wants to repeak it. Caustic throws his ult at me, but he misses, and obviously I'm a Caustic, but I see the ballistic ult. Saw that it was close. Back up. I preemptively throw the heat shield down because I know that the zone will overlap us at this point. I set off one of the traps. Ballistic drops all the way down into the trap, into my spray, down him. I'm pretty healthy. I throw another heat shield forward so that I put it on my other teammate's speeds. I know I have a gold knockdown from the Newcastle back there. I push up. Speeds had already downed one because of the ring and because of some gunfire, and now it's just 1v1. The lifeline's playing over by the downed enemy, but she doesn't play it super well. I thirst that guy and I crack her. Then I get squeezed behind this piece of cover and I res. I tell him, just Q at her and I'll push. And this way, she has no chance. So I slide out, I try to spray, and he Qs at her. It's just too much for her to handle, and we wrap it up. So you'll see here that we used a lot of abilities, survival items, and ultimately our gunfire as well. But this team had all of the advantages in the world. They had positioning, they had space, they had timing, and they botched it completely. You have to know in these moments how much space you need to take, and you have to know how to take it as well. And I think this was a good example of just hedging our bets by throwing the heat shields down, getting some gas traps out, activating them, forcing the fight a little bit in zone, because that ends up backfiring for them because it doesn't favor them at all. They end up losing that. And then by the time Lifeline does get to the circle, we are already in pretty good shape, and there's not that much more space to cover for us to get into the circle, and then we just outnumber her. But certainly having the gold knockdown here was very clutch. All right, now onto a Bangalore clip. This was a 50-50 at carrier. We went to the front, this team landed in the back. I got some faint audio sounds that they were still in the back here. And I see this Revenant pushes up, and I try to remain patient because I could hear these players in the back, and I didn't want them to wait for me to push out, and I knew I was up ahead of my teammates. So once Revenant pushes out, I get a good spray, but I take no damage. You'll see how I smoke this ship, and then I move to a different angle. I want to create some confusion here, and ultimately I know if I smoke here, I might screw up the teammates who are hanging in the back, but I can catch the Revenant by attacking closer and faster. See, I down him, then I instantly reposition, go back to the doors, wait for some of this commotion to unfold and have my teammates come in a little bit, immediately pop a cell, and then I get a nice beam through this. 2 down. I can see that the third player, because he shot me from the stairs, he missed. So then I get to the carrier ship and I just start thirsting the Revenant. I do this because I know it'll force this other player out of his positioning, and look what we have here. Boom, Loba, she's in line of sight of all 3 of us, and it's GG's. The smoke here was 100% used so that it would block off the other 2 teammates hanging in the back and create some confusion around what's happening. Now, I didn't completely smoke them off so that they couldn't see, but it was enough to put something between Revenant and them, and that's what ended up favoring me here. Now, in this next clip on Bangalore, this is a 2v3. I just heard a respawn ship over here. My teammate is a little bit behind me, and I'm taking that into account as I'm pushing up. I thought I only saw 1 player drop from the ship, and it looks like this Lifeline. She was caught slacking here a bit. She's on white armor. I push up. She elects to re-challenge, which was silly. I immediately use some cover and start to heal. Then I get an audio cue that they're pushing up. Then there's also a conduit ultimate, a little bit of chaos. So I smoke, I back up. I don't like that conduit ult. There's too much to shoot and not enough space to deal with it. So my teammate ended up pushing up. He gets down. He downs the conduit, luckily though. And then Horizon queues up and I crack her. So I destroy this little section of it, and then I go for the res. She's playing way back, and I can hear that she has a 30-30. So she's looking for more of a long range engagement, and I'm looking for more of a close range. I get the res off. I'm expecting a Horizon ult. Here it comes. 1 clip it. At this time, I'm just waiting for my teammates to reset, putting some pressure down. I smoke her. He throws a pad.
Almost.
Smoke really screws her up, as you can imagine why. She can't see very well. She doesn't understand exactly how many players are looking at her, or where they're exactly at. And I just use that to my advantage because I remember exactly where she is at. And I get a decent spray in the air at her. I think this fight is a great example of the subtleties of dancing in and out of the fight. Getting some damage, backing up, adjusting what's happening to me in live time, a conduit ult, my teammate pushing up. Luckily, he takes 1 down, right? But this team was pushing up pretty aggressively after I downed the Lifeline, and I didn't really like what was happening. So I back out, come back in, then we handle business. But it really comes down to teamwork, ability usage, and just understanding when to strike. I didn't get antsy and try to push out of my cover while the Horizon's ADSing me with a 30-30. I played patient, used the res, which is my leverage here, tried to search her teammate, see if that would make her come off the high ground to let it stay, so I just smoked it, teammate had it, and boom, GG's. Alright, moving on, later in this game, there's a team at Promenade who is shooting us, but quickly they start getting third party. So I used my Bangalore ult here because I thought they might push out onto that platform. As you can see, that Revenant is running low ground here. My Bangalore ult ended up doing nothing here. It wasn't the best use of the ability, but that's kind of hindsight because I wasn't sure exactly where everyone's at. We try to take the zip, and I obviously get fried, so I drop down. I throw an arc, I pop my bat. My teammate's holding for me. Then I'm going to pop a med kit. We're just going to back up. We thought about going up around, hitting up the other side. We can hear the audio above us. That sounds like they're just kind of mirroring us. They think we're going that way, so it's not looking too good at this point. You never want to be stuck low ground here. As we turn this corner, we see two people ratting here in pubs. Not sure why or what they're thinking, but we kill them pretty quickly. And now we're ready because the other team is thinking we're fighting, so they're going to drop. Crack the Mirage, and then we get shot at from the left, so that's where I smoke. I get a 64 spray, which is pretty good, but I knew my teammate was in rough shape, so I'm trying to buy some time here. My arc bounces off his back. There's a bunch of frags coming in from both sides. I'm able to 1v1 the Maggie, and then the guy peeks through the smoke. My teammate takes care of that Octane, and now it's just last one, and we call that out to each other. So my teammate medkits, and then I don't really shield here. I don't have bats, so I'm just kind of being aggressive. I know my teammate's right there for backup, and I trust him. If I was solo queuing, I definitely would have healed because, yeah, you know how randoms can be. But when you're playing with teammates you trust, you can do things together like this. Smoking here was clutch, you know, at the beginning of the fight where we got beamed off the zip line. That would create an element of surprise if these players wanted to drop and chase us. You know, it may cause some confusion as well. But then as the fight progresses and we kill that duo and the third party tries to approach, smoking off that Octane was huge because it allowed for the Maggie to push me while I couldn't get shot by the Octane. Of course, I did get some damage off, so the Octane may have just elected to heal, maybe not. And then the Mirage was playing a little too far back in order to get involved in this fight. He did try throwing some frag grenades, but ultimately smoking off that player so they're not able to abuse their off angle and get involved in the fight, even when they're not necessarily close, is what Bangalore is so freaking good at. I mean, of course, her smokes are very multifaceted. They can come in handy in so many different scenarios, and that's a huge reason why she's so meta still. These are 6 bad Apex habits keeping you down. Let's get into it. Number 1, not using your abilities enough. Look, you have to be in touch with what your legend does and is capable of in all kinds of different situations. Now, this may sound rather straightforward, but theory is one thing, and putting it into practice is a whole other beast. There's 24 legends right now, all with at least 3 abilities, and that doesn't even include their legend upgrades now. This can be a lot to manage for players who are not super experienced, especially if they don't main one legend. Chances are, though, if you do only play one legend and you have a lot of time on that one, then you're probably pretty good with your ability usage. But if that's not you, or if you venture off and playing another legend, you gotta learn to become more mindful about when and where to use those abilities. The longer Apex has been out, the more abilities have crept into affecting how fights turn out. This is something that will only continue to progress with more legends being added and more abilities being stronger. It's only natural for them to play a significant role in fights. The best advice that I can give here that will apply to any legend you're playing is first focus on the legend's class and use that to determine the type of role you're fulfilling for your squad. And then be sure to utilize specific strategies for that class to better place you in positions to strike with your abilities. If you're playing a support legend, for example, you're going to need to anchor for your team, meaning play behind them and be acutely aware of when they take any damage or go down. You're still going to need to focus on playing your life and shooting your gun, but you have to balance that with what your role is here. If you play a more aggressive legend like a skirmisher, you need to focus on using your mobility to get entry damage in the fight and then learn to close the gap, take a high ground angle, or possibly retreat depending on how the fight is playing out. There are so many different kinds of scenarios, but one of the most simple things in Apex is just timing your abilities and using them correctly. If you screw this up, it really becomes harder and harder to win against more experienced players because obviously they are using their abilities better than you are. And an underrated aspect to this is it really affects how your whole team plays too. One legend on the team plays a significant role in how that fight may turn out depending on what role they're fulfilling. So keep in mind, certain abilities don't just benefit you, they benefit your team too, and that's another factor you want to take into consideration while trying to improve. And if you are the type of player that enjoys playing one legend, then really try to focus on everything that legend is good at and avoid the things that they aren't. You really want to learn them inside and out and be really honed in to what their abilities do. For me, I have a lot of experience with Caustic, and certain fights I will always avoid are just getting him out in the open in transition. That is not something that he's strong at. He needs to play in a building or in some close quarters where he has some cover and some areas that he can control with his gas and his traps. Other legends do not want to find themselves in the same scenarios that Caustic likes to thrive in, and that's really what this is all about, leaning into what your legend does well, trying to avoid the scenarios that your legend is very weak in. Number 2, not taking advantage of damage in your team's favor. Look, this is something that players struggle with at all skill levels, and the degree in which will vary depending on where you're at in the skill ladder. But most importantly, if you just deal more damage than you take, then you need to move off of it, and I'm speaking broadly here. You need to get closer to that enemy and try to capitalize off the edge you have. Now, of course, if you're in an endgame scenario and one team is going to punish you from high ground as you push the other team that you just dealt the damage to, then you obviously don't want to risk that, and you're going to have to use your discretion in certain moments. But broadly speaking, if you're dealing more damage than you're taking, then you need to figure out a way to close the gap, because this all boils down to time. Okay, it's going to take the enemy player time to pop a shield battery, 5 seconds to be exact, and that's if they get to the spot that they think they can heal in, and then they pop the shield. If they don't have a battery, that time then extends to a much longer duration while they slowly heal up their shield. The point here is that if you can get to them before they start that process, then you're taking advantage of the advantage that you have over them. Now, I'm making this sound really simple and basic, and it's not always going to be like that, because Apex is a 3-on-3 game and there's 20 other teams in the lobby, so a lot can happen and a lot can go wrong even when you think you have an advantage up front. One of the things that a lot of players struggle with, particularly as they're climbing the skill ladder, is they deal some damage but they don't actually take any aggressive means to get to that enemy that they just did that to. So they kind of squander an opportunity, and then they may never get an opportunity like that again. Good players will know if that an enemy player didn't make them pay for whatever advantage they had over them previously. That then gives that enemy player confidence, because they know, okay, that player didn't take care of me when they had me beat. Now I feel like they're a weak player, and then that can just factor into the player being super confident and just wind up beating you when they get a different opportunity. Every player at one time or another will struggle with this, and it's something that's very common, but it just boils down to understanding the variables. What armor the enemy is on, what armor you're on, how much time will it take for you to get to that enemy. Is there another team that can make you pay for pushing, or is there another enemy player on that team that has a good angle that will shoot you as you cross to that player that you had low? Whatever the factors are, you need to evaluate them and be aware of them as best as you can, but you and your team need to learn to move off of that quickly and efficiently, because if you don't, this is a really bad habit to have in Apex. In the majority of scenarios, Apex has a long time to kill. This is not Call of Duty or another first-person shooter that, you can just one-shot somebody. An Apex fight can be grueling, it can be rather lengthy. There are a lot of variables at play that most players just aren't accustomed to unless they've played another FPS with a fairly lengthy time to kill. Next is number 3, which is panicking. Now, this is more of a mental thing, but it will manifest in many